Welcome to Saving America. This is Dr. David D. Schein, and we have a wonderful guest with us today. Dr. Michael Rectenwald meets that enviable definition of a Renaissance man, an impressive educational background paired with great teaching experience, including over a decade at the prestigious NYU. He is the author of 11 books, including the most recent, Thought Criminal, which was released just over a year ago. His current position is the Chief Academic Officer and co-founder of American Scholars, a pro-American educational platform. And with that, welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's get right off and talk about higher education. What do you see as the Biden administration's impact on higher education?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's through some executive orders that are basically advancing the transgender agenda and identity politics in general. I think that Biden is effectively accelerating the leftist, takeover of education, making it a place that's utterly inhospitable to all but leftist activists, really. When it comes down to it, this is what Biden is actually advancing. So I don't see anything principally new. I think it's pretty much along the same lines that things have been going for the past 5-6 years. This woke agenda has penetrated education and every other institution in the United States, from the alphabet agencies through corporate America. So Biden is just encouraging more of this, and I don't see anything that's principally different. It's pretty much just an acceleration of what's been already underway.
And I feel fortunate, as you know, I'm in higher ed also, to be at a relatively conservative university, although I was very surprised when I entered higher ed. I had been corporate, and I found that I expected the business school faculty to be relatively conservative, even vis-a-vis other parts of the campus. And I was surprised to find out that I was usually the only of one or two conservatives in the whole business faculty. And then we've got the faculty in the liberal arts and other areas who are, famously either political, and usually in the sciences, apolitical or, leaning somewhat left. But it is interesting to see, even in business schools, that the lean is a problem. And what's interesting to me, Michael, is that I respect the fact that there are some people who have serious psychological gender identity issues and stuff like that. But the surveys that have been done, even under the traditional standards for transgender, that many of those people who are cleared by the old-fashioned system in America, which took about 2 years to have a gender change operation, many of those people were unhappy afterwards. They were unhappy before and unhappy afterwards. And especially, I so much respect the thought that we need to not impose this on our young people, because they are changing and they are thinking and exploring. Yeah. So I really respect what your organization, American Scholars, is working on.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're working on a non-woke educational platform. That is to say, we are not propagandizing, we are not indoctrinating. We are presenting subject areas without this ideological lens that has been foisted into almost every discipline in the university system and business, because we do have this upstart woke capitalism, which is really penetrating much of the business community, from the top all the way down, from the leading asset managers like BlackRock Inc., all the way through the banking system and into, of course, the businesses themselves, who, having to abide by the ESG index, will be having to display their wokeness in effect through this index, and their funding could depend on it, really.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. We'll have to do that in another episode. I'm actually working on some ESG articles where we're going to dissect pieces as to how somebody becomes, ESG certified. But
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about the primary election because I actually voted in the Texas primary election on my way to the office today. And how do you expect young voters, our college students, to vote if they do show up for the primaries?
If they do show up, I think, we're going to see a vast majority voting Democrat. They
Mhm.
just, I don't think they have the perspective to understand what's happening. They sort of think that these policies and things that are being enacted by the Democrats are more or less normal and progressive and good. So I think that you're going to see most students voting Democrat. There is a rising tide of conservative voters now amongst the youth, amongst the college age students. And I think this is going to continue. This will become more of a factor in the midterm elections and the presidential election in particular. But right now, it's a small contingent, and it's a beleaguered contingent because they have to be very careful about what they think and say on campuses because they can be canceled, they can be ridiculed, they'll be hunted, so they'll be tortured by these activists. So I think it's a small contingent, but it will increase in number, and hopefully it will be able to voice its opinion without fear of retribution. So I'm looking at pretty much a Democratic voting base in the student population, but because of how the economy has been really racked by the Biden administration's policies, and inflation is up, and we have supply chain issues, and we have all kinds of pricing problems and supply problems. And I think that it's going to finally reach the students, and they'll understand that they're living in a world that's actually been made worse by virtue of these policies. And so by midterms and by the presidential election, we may see some fallout and lack of enthusiasm, in particular amongst the Democratic voting base in colleges.
Well, that's I think a very encouraging outlook, and I certainly hope it happens. And certainly, people like me, I'm very careful not to be political in the classroom, but I do talk about the realities. I teach. I've got business law and management, and I've been talking to the students about the real inflation rate and about real numbers and things like that, because anybody thinks their inflation rate is the official number, 7.5%, is living in a tunnel somewhere, because my
Right.
personal inflation rate, and I know these students, their personal inflation rates are a lot higher.
Yeah, a lot higher. I mean, you're looking at some things have doubled in price.
Yes.
We're looking at 50% or to 100% inflation in some areas, in some commodities. So yeah, I think it's a way worse situation than 7.5%, and that's based on selective selection of various commodities conveniently to reflect as low as possible rate as they can.
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing that you and I both know is that a lot of times the people at the lowest income level are disproportionately affected by these inflation numbers, and they're oftentimes the biggest victims. They're the people that cannot afford to live in the inner city, therefore they're commuting, so they're incurring a higher gas bill than
Absolutely.
perhaps other people. It's really interesting. Michael, we have limited time today because we want to make sure that our audience pays attention to what you say. I'd like you to talk for a few minutes about your book, Thought Criminal. I did read the libretto on the book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it sounds pretty interesting. Tell our listeners about that.
Sure. It's a futuristic, high-tech sci-fi novel. It's my first novel. I've written other fiction. I've written, of course, a lot of nonfiction,
Yes.
primarily. But I thought I'd try my hand at long fiction, which is quite difficult, but fun. So this is a future scenario in which we are living in a global state called pandemos, and there has been a virus, and the virus has been released, and we're told by the state that the virus is biological, but there's an AI professor of AI and neuroscience who believes that the virus is actually technological, that it's nanorobots, and that it has a function of connecting the minds, the brains of subjects to this entity called collective mind, MIND, which is a centralized database and processing system. And the idea here is that the collective mind overwrites people's actual thoughts and controls their thinking and eradicates their individuality. So the hero of the novel is attempting to elude the virus and collective mind in order to maintain his integrity as a person.
Sounds fascinating, and it sounds, even though it's futuristic, it sounds awfully timely, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Like I said, we try and keep these short so people actually listen to them and watch them. And we are so pleased, Dr. Michael Rectenwald, to have you with us today. Tell people how they can get more information about you.
Certainly. Yeah, everything is at my website. That's michaelrectenwald.com. One word, Michael, Rectenwald, Rectenwald.com. I have my essays there. All my books are linked there. Media appearances, events, speaking engagements, and so forth.
Thank you for joining us on Saving America, and we invite our viewers and our listeners to subscribe to our broadcast.